My name is Marin, and if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have told you family meant everything to me. I did what I could, worked extra hours, kept the peace, stayed quiet when things didn't feel fair. But sometimes, life hands you a moment so sharp, it slices through every excuse you've ever made for someone else. And when that moment comes, you don't walk away the same. You can't. So stay with me till the end of this story. Then tell me in the comments, do you think I did the right thing? I'm still not sure myself. It was a Monday morning in late September, the kind that smelled like burnt toast and quiet resentment. I remember the sharp edge of the air coming in through the cracked kitchen window, and the silence that hung heavy between the clinking of forks and the hum of the old refrigerator. My hands smelled faintly of coffee grounds from my early shift the day before, and I was already thinking about the laundry I needed to do before heading out again. I had just turned 18 a few weeks prior. No party, no cake, just a nod from my dad, and an offhand, "You're grown now," from my mom. The air in our house had changed since then, like something invisible, but heavy had settled on the walls. Breakfast became quieter, and the space between us at the table started to feel like miles. That morning, I sat at the end of the table like I always did. Two slices of toast, dry and a little burnt, sat untouched on my plate. My father, Daryl, was reading something, paperwork of some kind, and my mother, Lynette, was stirring her tea like she was trying to disappear into it. I could feel them watching me, not directly, but through sideways glances and the kind of tension that makes your stomach clench before anyone even speaks. Then, without looking up, my father slid a plain white envelope across the table. "What's this?" I asked, already knowing it wasn't a birthday card. "Breakdown of household expenses," he said. His voice was casual, like he was reading the weather report. "We figured it's time you start pulling your weight, fully." I opened the envelope. Inside was a neatly typed list. Rent, $1,200. Utilities, $300. Groceries, $300. Total, $2,000. Due the first of every month. I looked up slowly. "You're serious?" Lynette finally looked at me. Her eyes didn't hold anger, but something colder, distance. "You're not a kid anymore. You work, you live here, you eat our food, use our water, our electricity. This isn't a charity." "I already buy groceries. I pay my own phone bill. I give you cash every week," I said, the words coming out slower than my thoughts. "This is different. This is like I'm renting a room from strangers." Daryl folded his hands. "Exactly. You're not our responsibility anymore. If you want to live here, you pay. That's how it works in the real world." I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not sadness, just a slow cracking, like a window pane under pressure. For 18 years, I'd tried to be useful, tried not to take up too much space. I worked weekends since I was 14, gave up field trips to save money, skipped college so I could keep contributing. And now they wanted to hand me a bill like I was some freeloading guest overstaying her welcome. "I don't have that kind of money," I said, barely above a whisper. My dad shrugged. "Then you need to think about where else you can go." That was it. No argument. No discussion. No, "Let's figure this out together. Just think about where else you can go." I looked at both of them. Neither would meet my eyes. The toast had gone cold. The tea kept swirling. And in that moment, the kitchen that once smelled like pancakes and Sunday mornings turned into a room I didn't recognize. I stood up slowly. My legs felt numb. I didn't slam anything, didn't yell. I just walked away, out of the room, down the hall, and into the place that had been mine since I was 7. The room where I'd cried after middle school bullies, taped report cards to the wall, listened to music through headphones because Dad didn't like noise. That night, I barely slept. I packed what I could into a duffel bag: clothes, a journal, the little bit of cash I had saved from tips. It rained the morning I left. Not the kind of storm that shakes windows, but that quiet, soaking kind that seeps into everything. I stood on the front porch, watching droplets collect on my duffel bag, my hoodie already damp. My belongings, clothes, notebooks, a framed photo from middle school, sat in a cardboard box beside me, warping at the edges. No one said goodbye. No door opened. I don't even know if they watched me from the window. I didn't look back long enough to find out. I didn't have a plan. That's the part people always seem surprised about later, like they expect I had a safety net or at least some place to crash. But I didn't. I called a girl I used to be friends with in high school, someone I'd shared late-night fries and secrets with once. Her voice was polite but hesitant. Too many roommates already. Her mom wouldn't be okay with it. Maybe another time. I walked for a while. The rain clung to my skin like shame. I passed a shelter I'd Googled the night before, but they were full. A lady at the desk gave me a paper cup of lukewarm coffee and a half-hearted, "Good luck." That was when I remembered the cafe. Selma's Porch Cafe. I'd applied there a couple of months back. I never heard back, but I remembered the warm smell of baked goods drifting out the door, and the way the woman at the counter had smiled when I handed in my resume. I didn't think she'd remember me. I didn't even know what I was hoping for. But I walked there anyway. The place looked just like I remembered. Worn brick, navy trim, potted lavender by the steps. I hesitated outside for a moment, rainwater dripping from the ends of my sleeves. Then I pushed the door open. The little bell above the door jingled. Selma looked up from behind the counter. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, her glasses slid slightly down her nose. She blinked once, then again. "I remember you," she said. "You came in here about 2 months ago, didn't you?" I nodded, swallowing a lump in my throat. "Yeah, I don't know why I'm here, honestly." She studied me, but not in a way that made me feel small. Just thoughtful. Then she set down the cloth she'd been wiping the counter with and walked around to the front. "You look like someone who needs a hot drink and less questions." I didn't say anything. I didn't trust my voice. She led me to a small table by the window and brought over a cup of tea and a warm croissant. I stared at them like they were fragile gifts. When she sat down across from me, I expected her to ask what happened. Instead, she just said, "When's the last time you ate something warm?" I didn't know. I couldn't remember. In the quiet kitchen at the back of the cafe, I cried. Not big, messy sobs, just silent tears that slipped out before I could stop them. I sat on a wooden stool near the back door, while Selma stirred a pot of soup and said nothing. And somehow, that made everything bearable. "I've got a cot upstairs," she said after a while. "Nothing fancy, but it's dry, and it's yours for now. You help around the shop, we call it even." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Later that night, when she went downstairs to close up, I sat on the edge of the cot and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up. No missed calls, no messages. Nothing from Daryl, nothing from Lynette. Nothing. I scrolled down just to be sure, like I'd somehow missed something in my own inbox. But there was nothing but silence. Not even a, "Where are you?" And in that moment, something inside me stopped waiting. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel shocked. I felt confirmation, like some deep part of me had already known this, and now it was simply proven. I locked the phone, set it down on the nightstand, and curled up under the worn quilt Selma had left folded on the cot. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and old wood. It smelled more like home than anything else had in a long time. There's something oddly comforting about folding napkins when your life is in pieces. It gives your hands something to do while your heart catches up. That's how my first few weeks went at Selma's Porch Cafe. Sleeves rolled up, head down, doing small tasks, like they were the most important jobs in the world. In a way, they were. They were mine. Selma never hovered. She'd slide a plate my way and let me plate the muffins. She handed me the keys to the supply closet like I'd always worked there. No questions about where I came from, no sympathy stares. Just space, structure, and that quiet kind of trust that speaks louder than words. At night, I climbed the narrow stairs behind the kitchen to the small loft above the cafe. It wasn't much, just a cot, a dresser, a lamp, but I slept better there than I ever had in my own room. Something about not having to tiptoe around people who resented your existence made rest come easier. During the day, I worked as much as I could. When Selma closed up shop at 5, I walked 2 blocks to a used bookstore that stayed open late. The owner, an older man named Peter, needed help organizing shelves and checking out customers. It didn't pay much, but he paid in cash, handed me a flashlight for the dim back room, and let me take home 1 book a week. I started keeping a budget in a spiral notebook, listing every cent that came in and every cent that went out. I didn't want to ask anyone for anything. Not ever again. It was sometime in the 3rd week when the world reminded me it's not always kind, even when you're keeping your head down. A woman came into the cafe, one of those talkative types who thinks every barista wants her life story. She wore a puffer vest and talked loudly into her phone while waiting for her cappuccino. When she hung up, she looked me up and down with a squint that made my stomach tighten. "Aren't you Daryl and Lynette's girl?" she asked, too cheerfully. I nodded slowly. "Used to be," I said. She laughed like I'd made a joke. "They said you ran off. Something about not liking rules or responsibility. Teenagers, huh?" I froze. I wasn't surprised they hadn't come looking for me, but to hear they'd twisted it, that they were telling people I'd run off, like some dramatic kid throwing a tantrum. I managed a tight smile, handed her the drink, and turned away before she could say more. But something broke in me that afternoon, not with noise or tears, just a quiet, clean snap. I had spent nights wondering if I'd misunderstood things, if maybe I was being too sensitive, too proud. Maybe they just didn't know how to say sorry. Maybe they missed me and didn't know how to reach out. But now I knew. They weren't just silent. They were rewriting the story. They were painting me as the one who gave up. That night, after Selma went to bed and the hum of the fridge was the only sound in the loft, I pulled out a blank notebook. Not the budget one. This one was blue and soft-covered, still smelling like glue and cardboard. And I started writing. Not poetry, not venting. Just facts. What happened exactly? From the envelope at the breakfast table, to the rain-soaked porch, to the cot above a cafe. The pages filled slowly at first, then faster as my hand caught up with the truth. Writing it down made something clear. I hadn't left a family. I'd left a story I no longer belonged in, and I wasn't going to let them be the only ones telling it. After that night, I started journaling every day. Not just what happened, but what I felt. How scared I was when the lights flickered in the loft during a storm. How proud I felt when I balanced my budget to the dollar. How Selma's laugh sounded like gravel and honey. How I'd stopped jumping every time a phone rang. It wasn't a glamorous life. My shoes had holes in the soles. My jeans were starting to fray at the seams. I ate more leftover muffins than real dinners. But I was building something. Slowly. Brick by quiet, stubborn brick. And for the first time, I knew exactly who I wasn't. I wasn't the girl who ran away. I was the girl who stayed. Just not in the place they expected. Selma kept a bottle of red wine in the back of the pantry. Not for customers, she didn't drink often, but for what she called truth nights. Nights when the cafe had been slow, the sky looked a little too wide, and silence felt heavier than usual. That night, the rain tapped soft on the rooftop, and the lights in the loft flickered just enough to feel like something out of an old movie. She poured us each half a glass, handed me mine without a word, and sat down across from me on the worn-out armchair by the window. We didn't toast, just sat and sipped, both of us watching headlights roll by on the street below like ghosts with somewhere better to be. "I haven't spoken to my mother in 20 years, Selma said suddenly, her voice soft, not sad, just matter-of-fact. I looked up, surprised. "You don't talk at all?" She shook her head. "She wrote me off when I told her I wasn't quitting my job to take care of her full-time. I was 20. She'd raised me to believe that being a good daughter meant sacrificing everything. I waited. unsure if I should ask more. She had a bad hip, needed help around the house. I offered to hire someone with the little savings I had. She called me selfish, told me I'd regret it when she was gone. Selma's fingers traced the rim of her glass. But the thing is, I didn't regret it. Still don't. I regret how long I believed love was supposed to hurt. That sat with me. Not in my ears, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere between my ribs, where my own guilt had been living quietly for years. Sometimes love isn't absent, Selma added, her eyes meeting mine. It's just twisted beyond recognition. I didn't say anything for a while. I didn't have to. Something about Selma, her presence, her steadiness, gave you space to just sit with the truth, however ugly or overdue. That night, when I climbed into the cot, I stared at the ceiling and let my memories play back in no particular order. Birthday parties where the cake came with a lecture. Times I got a B and was told I wasn't trying hard enough. That trip to the lake where I stayed behind to clean up while everyone else went swimming. Things I'd brushed off as normal suddenly looked different under Selma's light. I started to realize how often love had been used as a transaction in my family. How every kindness came with an invoice. How guilt was the currency we used most often. The next morning, I opened my laptop and signed up for a free online course in personal finance. Then another one in marketing basics. I didn't know what I was going to do with them yet, but it felt good to be investing in something that couldn't be taken away from me. At the bookstore that evening, Peter asked if I wanted to help with the monthly inventory. I stayed late, sorting titles and alphabetizing rows that no one had touched in years. On the walk home, my head was buzzing, not from exhaustion, but from the possibilities. What if I started something small? A cleaning service maybe? Or an errand running business? People needed help. They just didn't always want to hire strangers. But me? I was dependable. I showed up. I didn't cut corners. And more than anything, I understood what it meant to feel invisible. Maybe I could build something out of that. By the end of the week, I'd mapped out a name. Greenbrier Home Services. Simple, professional, just enough nature to feel like a fresh start. I didn't tell anyone at first. It was mine, and I wanted something that didn't need to be explained or defended. Selma noticed, of course. She always did. One night, she passed me a cup of peppermint tea and said, "You're standing taller lately." "I think I'm just tired," I deflected. She smiled, slow and knowing. "No, kid, you're starting to take up space." That phrase echoed in my head for days. I'd spent so long trying not to be a burden that I'd forgotten it was okay to occupy the space you earned, to make decisions not out of survival, but out of choice. By the time the first customer paid me $20 to clean out their garage, I wasn't thinking about whether my parents would approve. I wasn't wondering what they'd say if they saw me sweeping out cobwebs in someone else's driveway. I was just doing the work, on my own terms, and I felt something close to peace. Not the quiet that comes from being ignored, but the kind that comes from finally hearing your own voice. I didn't need their validation anymore. Turns out, the only approval I'd been waiting for was my own. 5 years can pass in the blink of an eye when you're building something from scratch. I didn't realize how much time had gone by until I received the email. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon. I had just come back from a client meeting, an elderly woman I'd helped organize her garage for the 3rd time this year. My business, Greenbrier Home Services, wasn't flashy, but it was steady. Word of mouth traveled fast in a town like Tacoma. Folks liked that I showed up on time, didn't talk down to them, and never judged the mess. I sat down at my laptop, sipped on a lukewarm cup of tea, and clicked through my inbox. Among the invoices and appointment reminders, one subject line caught my eye. Property Status Inquiry, Maple Glen Estates. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. Inside, a message from a real estate firm I'd quietly subscribed to for years. The house I grew up in, the house I was kicked out of, was on the verge of foreclosure. A note from the bank revealed that payments had lapsed, and unless a buyer stepped in soon, It would go to public auction. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like it knew something I didn't. I hadn't seen or heard from my parents in nearly half a decade. Not a card, not a call, not even a forwarded chain email. And now, suddenly, their silence had turned into a flashing red signal. 3 days later, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, but some gut instinct, part fear, part curiosity, made me swipe. "Hi, sweetheart," said a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years. My mother. There was a softness to her tone I didn't recognize. It wasn't warm exactly, more rehearsed. "We've missed you," she said. "We were just talking the other day about how grown up you must be now. Maybe we could meet and talk things through?" I didn't respond right away. I heard myself breathing, but couldn't feel my hands. "We're not asking for anything," she added quickly. "Just a coffee, just a conversation." I agreed. Not out of longing, not out of guilt, but because I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know if they had changed, or if I had finally stopped hoping they would. We met at Selma's cafe. I warned Selma ahead of time, and she gave me the corner booth and a nod that said, "You've got this." They walked in together, Daryl and Lynette, looking older, thinner. My mother smiled like she'd been waiting for this moment. My father offered a nod that didn't reach his eyes. For a few minutes, we talked about nothing: weather, work, Tacoma traffic. Then the real reason for the reunion slid onto the table in the form of a folded bank statement. "We've had some struggles," my mother said, tucking her hands into her lap. "Medical bills, property taxes. The mortgage ballooned more than we expected." Daryl cleared his throat. "We're trying to avoid losing the house." I waited. "We were hoping," he continued, "that maybe you could help. Temporarily. Just a loan. It's what family does, right?" I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I kept my face calm. They weren't here for a relationship. They were here for a rescue. I wasn't angry, not the way I thought I'd be. I wasn't heartbroken either. I was tired. Tired of always being someone's last resort, never their first choice. I looked at them. These people who had once handed me an envelope and told me to find somewhere else to sleep. And all I could think was how small they looked now. Not in size, but in spirit. They hadn't changed. They were still calling their decisions love and mine betrayal. I pushed my cup aside and stood slowly. "I'm not the same girl who left your porch with rain in her shoes," I said. My father looked up, eyes narrowing. "We're still your parents." "No," I said, soft but steady. "You were my parents, and what family does is not this." I left without finishing my tea. Outside, the air smelled like cedar and the first hints of spring. I walked slowly, letting each step ground me in the present. No more guessing, no more waiting. I had finally heard the truth with my own ears, and now I could let go of the question that had haunted me for years. Did they ever care? Maybe they did, but only when it served them. And I had learned how to care for myself in ways they never could. I drove past the old house on a Sunday afternoon. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I needed to see it one last time before making my decision. Maybe I wanted to remind myself that it was real, that everything that happened inside those walls wasn't just a bad dream I'd outgrown. The siding was still the same faded gray, the porch railing still crooked in the same spot Dad never fixed, but something about it looked hollow, not abandoned, but stripped of warmth. The yard was unkempt, the shutters needed painting, and the flower beds were bare, like no one had bothered to care for it in a while. A neighbor from 2 doors down walked by, slowed, and gave me a squint of half recognition. I smiled politely. She paused and said, "They're losing the place, aren't they?" Heard something about the bank stepping in. I didn't answer, just nodded vaguely and got back in my car. But her words echoed in my chest long after I drove away. Losing the place. Truth was, I'd been watching the listing for months. Quietly, cautiously, through a business account tied to Greenbrier Holdings, my LLC. Not under my name, never anything traceable, not because I had anything to hide, but because I needed this to be about closure, not confrontation. I hadn't planned to buy it, not at first. It felt dramatic, petty even. But as the weeks passed and the calls from the mortgage firm came more frequently, I realized it wasn't about the house. It was about what that house represented and what I needed to reclaim from it. So I made the offer. Low enough to be smart, high enough to ensure I wouldn't have to deal with a bidding war. All through Greenbrier. All through silence. The paperwork came through 2 weeks later. I sat at my small kitchen table in the apartment I rented above a bakery downtown and signed every page with steady hands. There was a finality in the click of each pen stroke. I didn't want the house. I wanted the silence that came with finally closing a door. Once the sale was official, I didn't call my parents. I didn't drive over or leave a note. I let the eviction notice arrive through the proper channels. Impersonal, procedural, clean. But I did write a letter. Not to them. Not really. Just for me. I kept it simple. A piece of lined notebook paper, folded once, no envelope. You didn't lose me when I left, I wrote. You lost me when you opened the door and let the rain in. I folded it again, placed it in a box with other things I didn't need to revisit. Old photos, receipts from my first month living above the cafe, the envelope they gave me that morning 5 years ago. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I didn't. Grief had already done its work long ago. What I felt now was something closer to stillness. People talk about healing like it's some big, dramatic moment, like a sunrise that wipes away all the dark. But for me, it came in quieter forms. In filing paperwork under my business ID, in choosing the font for the contract, in knowing I'd never again need to ask for a key that was already mine. The power wasn't in the ownership, it was in the detachment. I didn't buy the house to live in it. I didn't even go inside. I hired a local team to clean it out and prep it for resale. I'd already decided I'd list it again, maybe even offer it below market to someone starting fresh, someone who needed a home more than a monument. Some people would have seen that as generous. Some might say I should have kept it, made it mine. But keeping it would have meant holding on to a history I no longer believed in. Letting go, though, that was mine. All mine. A few days later, I passed the house one last time. The porch was empty. A truck was parked out front, boxes piled up on the lawn. No one saw me. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. And for the first time since I was 18, I didn't wonder if they missed me. I just drove on, windows down, radio low, and the kind of silence I'd waited years for sitting beside me in the passenger seat. They had 30 days to leave. The notice wasn't dramatic. It came printed on white paper, tucked neatly in a certified envelope. Just a line of legal language explaining that the property had changed ownership, and the new entity, Greenbrier Holdings, LLC, was requesting possession by the end of the month. No accusations. No finger-pointing. No name to curse at in anger. I'd made sure of that. The paperwork had been airtight. My name never appeared. Just the LLC, registered through a firm 2 counties over. Every call they made, every email they sent, landed at a third-party management office. I'd instructed the team to log the messages, but never respond. Still, they tried. Desperation has a way of breaking through pride when the walls start closing in. The first voicemail from my mother was sweet in that cloying, calculated tone I remembered too well. "Hi, we just received a strange notice about the house. I'm sure this is some mix-up. Maybe you could call back and help us understand what's going on?" Then came the second. "I just think, after everything, you might reconsider. Families work things out, don't they? Surely we can talk about this." By the fourth message, her tone sharpened. The sweetness soured. "You have no idea what this is doing to us. It's not right to throw your parents out on the street. That's not how decent people behave." My father didn't leave voicemails. He sent one short email. "We've made mistakes, but this is low. Even for you. I didn't reply. Because it wasn't about being low. It was about being finished. They had 30 days, and now it was the last one. That morning, I pulled up to the curb across from the house I once called home. My home. Until they decided it wasn't. Until they'd handed me a bill and told me to find somewhere else to sleep. The house looked smaller now, not just physically, but in weight, in meaning. The siding was chipped, the lawn dry and uneven. What had once felt like the center of my world was now just a tired shell waiting to be emptied. A moving truck sat parked at the bottom of the driveway. The back doors hung open, exposing boxes, worn furniture, and an old dresser I used to keep my art supplies in. The sight of it didn't sting. It just felt distant, like recognizing someone in a photograph taken long ago. From my car window, I watched them, Daryl and Lynette, carrying their lives out in pieces. They didn't speak to each other. They didn't argue. Just slow movements, cardboard scraping against the wood porch, doors opening and closing with a soft, hollow thud. I let them work in silence for a few more minutes, then stepped out of the car. The cold air hit first, crisp and dry. I pulled my black coat tighter, adjusted the cuffs of my sleeves. My boots made a steady, deliberate sound on the sidewalk as I walked across the street. Not fast, not hesitant, just steady. When I stepped onto the grass, Lynette looked up, her hands still gripping the sides of a box labeled kitchen. She froze. You? Her voice cracked halfway through the word. Her face went pale. Not from shame, not from guilt, from recognition. My father followed her gaze, turned slowly, and locked eyes with me. His expression didn't change, just his jaw, set tighter than I'd ever seen it. He looked at me like I was something unreal, a piece of the past that had no right walking through the present. I didn't stop until I was 10 feet away. No closer. Just enough. I looked at them, really looked. Not as their daughter, not as a child waiting for love. Just as a person, seeing two others for who they were, without the lens of longing or apology. And I said, in a voice that was calm, clear, and mine, "Happy eviction day." It wasn't cruel, it wasn't loud, it was just final. They didn't speak. Lynette took a step back. Daryl's mouth twitched, but he said nothing. I turned around and walked back to my car. The wind picked up a little as I opened the door. I slid inside, closed it gently, and let my fingers rest on the steering wheel. I didn't cry. Not because I was numb, but because there was nothing left to grieve. That girl who once stood on that same porch with wet hair and nowhere to go, she had already cried all her tears, and she had survived. What I felt now was weightless, not joy, not triumph, just the soft, steady quiet of something fully over. I looked at the house once more, the porch where I'd sat with scraped knees, the front window where I used to press my forehead on stormy days, waiting for someone to notice I was sad. The door they closed on me once, now closing behind them. I exhaled, then I started the engine and drove away. No music, just the hum of the road and the kind of silence that fills you up when something finally, fully lets go. I didn't celebrate. After everything, the paperwork, the eviction, the final delivery of keys, I went home, dropped my bag on the floor, and made a cup of tea. The kettle hissed softly on the stove while I stood in the doorway of my small apartment above the bakery, hands still trembling, though not from nerves. Just from the release. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't call Selma. I didn't even change out of my coat for a while. I just sat there in the amber glow of the stove light, tea in hand, the steam curling upward like a slow exhale I hadn't realized I'd been holding for 5 years. I thought I'd feel triumphant, or at least satisfied. Instead, I felt still. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from exhaustion, but from the quiet certainty that there's nothing more to chase, nothing more to prove, that what's done is truly done. It wasn't revenge, it was closure. I wasn't smiling at their downfall, I wasn't waiting for some grand apology that would never come. I didn't need them to change anymore. What I needed was to finally stop carrying them around with me. And that's what I'd done. The next afternoon, Selma texted me, "Come by after close." I made cake, no questions asked. That was her way of celebrating. Simple, honest, soft around the edges. At the cafe, she had 2 slices of almond cake set out and a pot of peppermint tea already steeping. We sat at the table by the front window, the same one I used to clean religiously when I first started working there, back when I still felt like I had to earn every square inch of space I occupied. She clinked her mug against mine. "You did it!" I let out a small laugh. "I didn't do much. I just stopped waiting for something that wasn't coming." Selma leaned back, studying me in that quiet way she did, as if she could see the things I hadn't said yet. "You know," she said after a moment, "the last time I saw my mother, I didn't go to make peace. I just told her I did what I had to." She didn't say anything back, just turned away. That was the last time I saw her face. I looked at her, waiting, knowing there was more. She sipped her tea. "Sometimes people can only meet you where they are, and sometimes that's not very far." Her words landed inside me like a slow drop of honey, not sweet, but thick, undeniable. Later that night, when I was alone, I sat down with a pen and a single sheet of paper. I didn't write to my parents. I didn't even write to the woman I was now. I wrote to the girl I used to be, the one who stood on a porch 5 years ago, soaked with rain and shame and silence. The one who didn't know yet that the worst thing that could happen might also be the beginning of everything better. Dear you, if you're reading this, I hope you've stopped measuring your worth in other people's expectations. I hope you've learned that love given out of obligation isn't love at all. I hope you know now that walking away doesn't make you cruel. It makes you free. Me, I folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box beneath my bed. Inside were a few artifacts of the life I'd rebuilt. My first journal entry after leaving home, the crumpled receipt from the first cleaning job I booked, and now, a thin plank of wood I had pried from the corner of the old living room floor, one that creaked every time someone stepped on it, a sound I'd grown up knowing as home. I didn't keep the house. I never planned to. That wasn't the point. I sold it to a couple in their late 20s. They were newly married, excited, nervous. She was pregnant. He asked me why I was letting it go for below market value, with new appliances already included. I just said, "Some things are meant to stay in the past." They didn't ask for more. They signed the papers, thanked me profusely, and left with keys that once belonged to people who had never understood what they were really holding. The only thing I kept was that piece of floorboard. Just a small, silent reminder. You can leave the house, but don't forget the lesson. The morning after the sale closed, I woke naturally, with the sun creeping through my curtains and a breeze dancing across the wooden floors. I padded to the kitchen barefoot, made coffee slowly, and stood by the window, watching people go about their day. No one needed anything from me. No one was waiting for me to perform. There were no ghosts pressing against the glass, asking for pieces of me I no longer owed. I was no one's burden, no one's redemption arc, no one's safety net. I was just a woman in her own kitchen, living a quiet life she had fought like hell to build. And it wasn't perfect. The roof still leaked when it rained too hard. The business still had slow months. I still had moments, like that morning, when I reached for the phone instinctively, wondering if there'd be a text that would never come. But it was mine. Not because someone gave it to me, because I chose it. Every hard, beautiful, ordinary part of it. I didn't need anything more. I was simply free. And that was enough. I don't know if there's a perfect way to walk away from people who once meant everything to you, but I do know this. Peace doesn't always come with a dramatic ending. Sometimes it's just the quiet relief of choosing yourself. Finally, fully, without guilt. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you're still there now. If this story touched something in you, I hope you'll stay with me for the next one. There's something healing in being heard, even by a stranger who understands.